On the night of October 14th, 1991, 59-year-old Helen Whitmore left the small-town library in Oregon after her weekly book club meeting. It was a routine she had followed for years. She waved goodbye to friends, stepped into the cool evening air, and began the short walk home. The distance was barely 10 minutes. She never arrived. The following morning, Helen was expected at church. She never missed a service. When she failed to show up, friends grew concerned. Hours passed with no word. By the afternoon, her granddaughter Emily called police to report that Helen hadn't come home the night before. Officers immediately began searching the familiar path between the library and her house. Near the roadside, under a large oak tree, they found Helen's purse. Her wallet, keys, and a small amount of cash were still inside. Nothing had been stolen, but Helen was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no witnesses. It was as if she had stepped off the road and vanished. The case shook the town. Neighbors formed search parties. Flyers with Helen's face went up on every corner. Local news called it one of Oregon's most baffling disappearances. Investigators considered robbery, kidnapping, even the possibility she left on her own. But nothing fit. The community believed a stranger must have taken her. For months, fear spread. Families locked their doors. Rumors of a predator in the area grew louder. But the truth would prove even more disturbing. The person responsible wasn't a drifter, and it wasn't someone passing through town. The answer was far closer, hidden inside Helen's own home. If you're following this story so far, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Cases like this remind us how quickly an ordinary evening can turn into a nightmare, and the more we talk about them, the less likely they are to be forgotten. Now that we know the night Helen disappeared, let's step back and understand who she really was, the life she built in this small town, and why her sudden absence left such a hole in the community. Helen Whitmore was born in Oregon in 1932. She grew up in a small town where nearly everyone knew each other. Her parents were teachers, and discipline, honesty, and hard work were values that guided her from the very beginning. She carried those values into adulthood and never let go of them. By the time she reached her early 20s, Helen had chosen a path that would define most of her life. She became a librarian. At first, it was just a job, a way to earn a living in her community. But soon it became her life's calling. She worked at the town library for almost 3 decades. Over those years, she became more than just the woman who checked out books. She became the guardian of knowledge, the one who cared for dusty volumes, old records, and the history of the town itself. For the people who lived there, Helen wasn't simply the librarian. She was the memory keeper. Generations of children grew up listening to her voice during reading sessions at the library. Parents trusted her to watch over their kids as she opened up stories of adventure, history, and faith. Adults who had never finished school came to her evening classes, where she taught them the basics of reading and writing, with patience and dedication. For Helen, books were more than pages and ink. They were tools to guide people toward a better life. Her personal life, however, was much harder. Helen married young, and for a time, she believed she had found stability. But her husband, for Helen, it was not a burden. She took in her granddaughter and raised her as if she were her own child. She made sure Emily had food, clothing, school supplies, and a safe place to grow up. She encouraged her to study, to read, and to dream bigger than the small town around them. But Helen was also strict. She demanded discipline. She reminded Emily to save money, to stay in school, to live with responsibility. For a child who watched her classmates wear brand-name clothes, carry new gadgets, and take trips with their parents, life with her grandmother often felt like a cage. This difference in values grew over the years. Helen, shaped by the hardships of her own life, believed in simplicity and sacrifice. Emily, growing up in a different world, wanted freedom and the chance to enjoy what others around her had. What began as quiet disagreements slowly hardened into daily tension. Helen's warnings about spending and schoolwork turned into lectures. Emily's silence turned into defiance. Despite these struggles at home, Helen remained a beloved figure in the town. She never let personal issues show when she was with others. Every week, without fail, she went to church. Her faith was a cornerstone of her life. She was not only present on Sundays, but also active in church events throughout the week. She volunteered at bake sales, helped organize charity drives, and spent time with the women's group preparing meals for families in need. To her fellow church members, Helen represented commitment and kindness. They saw her as someone who lived her faith, not just spoke about it. Neighbors remembered her walking to church with her Bible tucked under her arm, greeting everyone along the way. For Helen, religion wasn't just a part of her schedule. It was a part of her identity. She believed in service, in helping others, and in following rules that gave life meaning. People trusted her deeply because of that. Her role in Still, the community rarely saw this side of their relationship. To the outside world, Helen was the devoted grandmother raising a child with love and patience. No one suspected the tension that grew behind closed doors. Emily herself often played the role of the sweet, struggling granddaughter. She could be charming when she wanted to, and many townspeople felt sympathy for her situation, being raised by a grandmother while her parents built lives elsewhere. As the years passed, Emily's frustration deepened. She watched friends wear expensive clothes, go on vacations, and buy the latest accessories. She compared herself constantly and felt cheated. She wanted the same lifestyle, but Helen refused to indulge her. Instead, Helen insisted on saving money, focusing on school, and living modestly. For Helen, it was the only way to survive and thrive. For Emily, it felt like punishment. By 1991, the situation inside the small house had reached a breaking point. Helen was 59, approaching retirement, still active in her church and library work. Emily was 22, no longer a child, but still living under her grandmother's roof. She had dropped out of school and resisted every attempt to be pushed back into classes or steady work. The arguments became louder, the silence more bitter. Friends of the family would later say they had noticed tension, but no one imagined how serious it was. Helen never spoke publicly about the strain with Emily. She continued attending church, volunteering, and keeping her reputation as a kind, dependable woman. But in private, she worried about her granddaughter's future. She believed discipline was the only answer. Emily believed freedom and money were all that mattered. This quiet battle between values, between sacrifice and indulgence, between control and rebellion, was not visible to the community. To the people around them, Helen and Emily were just another grandmother and granddaughter, making life work under one roof. But those who lived close by would later The town where Helen lived was small, quiet, a place where everyone knew each other's routines. Neighbors recognized who walked past their porch, who went to church on Sunday, who stopped at the farmer's market on weekends. It was the kind of place where strangers stood out, and where the disappearance of someone like Helen felt impossible. Helen herself was not just another resident. She was central to the life of the community. For 30 years, she had run the town library. Children grew up listening to her read aloud on Wednesday afternoons. Adults remembered how she helped them fill out forms, search old records, or simply find a book that mattered. People called her the heart of the library. Her name appeared on church bulletins and community newsletters. When something needed doing, Helen was often there. Every Sunday she was in church, always in the same pew. She was punctual, dependable, the type of person who built her week around faith and service. During the week, she joined the women's group, where they organized donations and food drives. She helped prepare clothing bundles for families who had fallen on hard times. Neighbors remembered seeing her walk home carrying bags of canned goods for distribution. For many in town, she was a reminder of stability, of a life rooted in discipline and kindness. That image made her disappearance even harder to believe. People asked the same question again and again. How could someone like Helen vanish in a place where everyone knew everyone? Her reputation added to the shock. She had taught several older residents to read. Those same people came forward to defend her when rumors started. They insisted she was never in trouble, never careless, never the type to wander off. Parents pointed out that they trusted her with their kids at the library without a second thought. To them, Helen was one of the safest people in town. Alongside her stood Emily, her granddaughter. To the public, Emily was a neighbors kept watch. Houses on Helen Street were occupied mostly by older couples who spent evenings on their porches. They noticed the lights that came on and off. They knew the sound of Helen's front door closing, the way her footsteps carried down the walkway. This familiarity created confidence. If anything unusual happened, surely someone would notice. And yet, when she vanished, no one could explain it. There were blind spots. The short walk between the library and Helen's home was poorly lit. A few streetlights worked, but several sections were left in near darkness. In 1991, there were no cameras on poles or storefronts to capture what happened. That detail gave weight to one of the earliest theories, that a stranger could have followed her on that walk and taken her without anyone seeing. Some residents recalled something odd in the days leading up to October 14th. A man they didn't recognize had been spotted on the road near the library. He lingered, smoking, watching. A few thought he was just passing through. When Helen disappeared, those sightings suddenly seemed more sinister. Rumors spread quickly. Perhaps this stranger was the one responsible. The moral certainty of the town pushed people toward this conclusion. They believed evil had to come from the outside. Within the church, people said no one local would ever harm Helen. She was too respected, too loved. That assumption shaped everything: the rumors, the press coverage, and even the early stages of the investigation. Local newspapers covered the story relentlessly. Headlines described her as the gentle grandmother and the faithful librarian. Articles pointed out that she had disappeared just steps from her home, in the same streets she had walked safely for decades. To readers, it sounded like the ultimate violation of trust, that even in a small town, even near your own front door, safety could be taken away. The response was immediate. Volunteers broke into groups and searched every direction from Helen's house. They combed the riverbank. They moved through the woods. As the days turned into weeks, stories multiplied. People claimed to have seen a strange pickup truck near the library. One woman insisted she saw a man in a hat standing by the parking lot just minutes after the book club ended. Another swore she noticed a blue car driving unusually slowly down Helen's Street. Every sighting seemed to support the theory of an outsider prowling the town. Fear grew. Parents began escorting their children to school. People bought stronger locks. Some purchased dogs for protection. Gun sales quietly rose. The sense of safety that had defined the town dissolved almost overnight. Residents who had left doors unlocked for decades began checking them twice. For the police, the pressure mounted. Citizens demanded more patrols at night. They asked for new streetlights along the library route. Some even pressured the library to shorten its evening hours. Every town meeting turned into a forum about safety. Investigators, meanwhile, were stretched thin. They followed up on every report of a strange man or suspicious vehicle. Each lead fizzled. Radio stations built their own timelines of the night Helen disappeared. They interviewed neighbors, church members, even people from nearby towns. Yet without hard evidence, their broadcasts only repeated the same mystery: a beloved woman, a dark walk home, and no clear answers. Listeners filled in the blanks themselves, convinced a drifter or a predator had struck. The social fabric of the town changed. For decades, crime had been rare. Petty theft, maybe a fight at the bar, but nothing violent. People lived modestly, most working in small businesses or farming. The disappearance of someone like Helen was more than just one case. It was a collapse of their sense of order. Still, throughout all of this, Emily remained in the public eye. She gave interviews. She held vigils. She kept the story alive in front of the cameras. To nearly everyone, she looked like the young woman whose life had been torn apart. No one suspected that her tears might hide a death. In reality, the seeds of tragedy were inside from the very beginning. Helen's strict values, Emily's resentment, the clash between tradition and desire. These conflicts were hidden from the community, but central to the truth. For months, no one imagined it. For months, Emily stood with the crowd, pretending to be one of the mourners. And for months, the town believed they were hunting a ghost on the streets, never realizing the answer was living among them. October 14th, 1991. It was a Monday night in a quiet Oregon town. The weather was unsettled, a steady mist falling over empty streets. By 9 p.m., the library's book club had finished its weekly meeting. Members packed their coats, said their goodbyes, and drifted out into the night. Helen Whitmore stayed until the very end. At 59 years old, she was as dedicated to the club as she was to the library itself. That night, she was the last person to leave the building. She gathered her handbag, tucked a book under her arm, and stepped outside. A few friends remembered her final words. She said she would walk home. It was the same short walk she had taken hundreds of times before, 10 minutes at most. The route was familiar. 3 turns along narrow streets led straight to her front door. Most evenings, the road was watched by neighbors sitting on porches, chatting after supper, or keeping an eye on the street. But this night was different. The rain kept people indoors. The usual eyes that might have spotted something unusual were absent. At around 9:30 p.m., a couple who lived just blocks from Helen's house noticed something odd. They reported hearing the sound of a car moving slowly along the street. At that hour, traffic was rare. They couldn't see the vehicle clearly through the rain, but they remembered the engine noise because it broke the stillness of the night. That was the only sound anyone recalled. No screams. By midday, the concern became official. Around noon, Helen's granddaughter Emily phoned the police. She told them her grandmother had not returned from the library the night before. She added that she herself had been out with friends, having already asked Helen for permission, so she hadn't been home. Her call set the investigation into motion. Officers began retracing Helen's usual route. They walked the wet sidewalks, scanned the ditches, and searched for anything out of place. Just a few hundred meters from her home, near the edge of the road, They found something. It was a single shoe. A woman's shoe, later confirmed to belong to Helen. It lay on its side, damp from the rain, with no other belongings nearby. The discovery raised immediate alarms. For investigators, a lost shoe suggested an interruption, a sudden moment where Helen was forced off her path. But there were no drag marks, no footprints in the mud leading into the brush. The ground showed some disturbance, but nothing conclusive. They passed from the library. There was no possibility that she had left town by car. Inside her house, officers found no signs of preparation for travel. No suitcase, no missing clothes, no evidence that she had planned to go anywhere. Her purse was missing, but later, during a broader search, it was discovered under a tree along the route between the library and her home. Inside were her wallet, her keys, and a small amount of cash. Nothing was stolen. Investigators questioned everyone who had attended the book club. All gave the same account. Helen was cheerful, she stayed until the end, and she left alone. They confirmed the time as shortly after 9 p.m. No one followed her out. No one saw anything suspicious at that moment. Neighbors along the street were also questioned. Most had been inside because of the weather. A handful recalled hearing the sound of a vehicle. One elderly resident said he noticed a car that looked The possibility of voluntary disappearance was quickly dismissed. Helen had deep roots in the town, her faith, her work, her routines. She had left no notes, made no preparations, and her personal belongings showed no sign of planning a departure. For investigators, the evidence pointed away from choice and toward foul play. The single shoe was catalogued, photographed, and preserved. Detectives marked its position carefully. They hoped forensic analysis would provide fibers, soil samples, or prints. But in 1991, testing capabilities were limited. The rain further damaged any chance of clear evidence. The purse raised more questions. It was found intact, its contents untouched. If robbery had been the motive, money or keys would have been taken. Their presence suggested another explanation. Perhaps the purse was deliberately placed to mislead investigators into thinking Helen had been taken by a stranger. The timeline grew more disturbing with each hour. Helen left the library at 9 p.m. She should have been home by 9:10 or 9:15 at the latest. By 9:30, neighbors reported hearing the car. By morning, she had not returned. In less than half an hour, something had happened that removed her from the streets entirely. Detectives mapped the area in detail. They measured distances, considered the speed of an abduction, and the possible routes a car could take out of town without being noticed. Volunteers joined to expand the search radius, sweeping fields, wooded lots, and creek beds. Dogs were brought in to track scent, but were hampered by the overnight rain. The absence of a clear crime scene left investigators unsettled. They expected to find signs of a struggle, torn clothing, drag marks, or discarded belongings. Instead, they had silence. As hours turned to days, the case drew local attention. The press described the mystery in plain terms. A woman who left her library meeting vanished in the short distance to her house, leaving only a shoe and a purse behind. Radio stations repeated the timeline, calling it baffling. Reporters emphasized that this was a woman with no enemies, a respected figure in the church and library. For listeners, the lack of answers deepened the fear. The town grew restless. People began avoiding the dark streets at night. Families drove to evening services instead of walking. Parents escorted children in pairs. A growing belief took hold that a stranger, possibly a predator, was responsible. The single shoe and reports of the car were treated as proof of an outsider's involvement. But inside the police department, doubts remained. Some investigators questioned why Helen's belongings were left untouched. Others wondered why no one had seen the actual act, given how close she was to home. They filed the details, waiting for stronger evidence to appear. For Emily, the granddaughter, her role began the same day she called police. She told officers she had been out with friends, that she had asked permission, and that she had returned to find her grandmother missing. Her statement seemed reasonable. Friends confirmed she had been with them. At that time, she was seen as a helpful witness, not a suspect. The search continued. Posters went up. Flyers were pinned to shop windows and telephone poles. The church became a base for volunteers. But despite hundreds of hours of effort, nothing more was found. The single shoe and the purse remained the only physical evidence. Police issued a public statement. They confirmed that Helen had left the library at 9 p.m. They confirmed her purse and shoe were found along her route. They confirmed her car was at the repair shop, ruling out travel. But beyond that, they had no definitive lead. Detective Mark Reynolds, the lead investigator, spoke cautiously. In his first report, he said it was possible Helen had been attacked at random, a crime of opportunity. Perhaps a drifter, someone passing through. In towns like this, where serious crime was rare, that explanation made sense. People believed strangers were the threat, not neighbors. The theory gained strength when a man came forward. He said he had seen a vehicle the night Helen vanished. A blue pickup truck, old, rusted, parked near the library. He noticed it because it was out of place. He didn't recognize it, and in a town where everyone knew everyone, that alone was suspicious. The press seized on the detail. Headlines called it the Blue Truck Mystery. Stories suggested a stranger had stalked the town. Reporters described an outsider waiting for an opportunity, then striking when Helen walked into the dark streets. The image fit perfectly with the fear spreading among residents. The search grew. Officers divided the town into sectors. Volunteers joined, sweeping fields, walking the wooded edges, combing the riverbank. Church members prepared food for search parties. Maps were pinned with markers showing each area covered. The library became a base for officers, while the church became a hub for the community. But the evidence refused to appear. Apart from Helen's shoe and purse, there was nothing. No blood, no weapon, no torn clothing, no clear footprints. Without those, there was no sign of a struggle. Investigators were left with objects, but no narrative. Reynolds admitted privately that the scene didn't add up. Robbery didn't make sense. The purse had been left untouched. Kidnapping didn't make sense either. No ransom notes, no calls. Yet, the community wanted answers. Fear demanded explanations. The media pushed the story daily. Helen's photo was everywhere. Newspapers, flyers, the evening news. Beloved librarian missing. Gentle woman vanishes. For weeks, her face was the front page. The pressure on police grew heavier by the day. Rumors filled the gaps. People swore they had seen a man in a hat lurking near the library. Others spoke of a blue car creeping slowly down Helen's street the night she disappeared. Someone else said they heard a metallic clang, maybe a door slamming shut. Each story was vague, but together they created an image of an unknown predator haunting the town. The community responded with fear. Parents stopped letting their children walk alone. Families began installing stronger locks, some even buying firearms for protection. Dogs were purchased as guards. People demanded more street patrols, more lights along dark stretches. At meetings, voices rose in frustration. Residents asked how something like this could happen in their quiet town, and why the police had no answers. Emily became the face of the case. She appeared on television, eyes swollen from tears, clutching photos of her grandmother. She begged people not to give up. She said her grandmother was everything to her, and she couldn't imagine life without her. The image resonated. Reporters described her as the devoted granddaughter. Crowds at vigils embraced her. Her words, "Don't let her case disappear," were repeated in newspapers. She became the emotional anchor of the search. For investigators, her role was useful. She directed attention away from family and toward the theory of an outsider. No one questioned her sincerity. Weeks turned into months. Leads were pursued, one after another, all dead ends. Officers tracked down every report of a suspicious vehicle. They checked registration records, interviewed owners of similar blue trucks, questioned drivers passing through. None connected to Helen. The FBI was consulted briefly, but without federal jurisdiction. Detective Reynolds gave an interview in December. He admitted there was no hard evidence. He said they had theories, but nothing they could prove. He promised the case was still active, but the words offered little comfort. Through winter, the town carried the weight of the mystery. Every church service included prayers for Helen. Candlelight vigils were held in the cold. Flyers were reprinted, though everyone already knew her face. Children whispered about the missing librarian. Parents kept them close. The disappearance had become part of the town's identity. As time passed, the pain deepened. Each week without answers lowered the chance of finding Helen alive. Hope shrank, replaced by grief. Yet the community clung to the belief that someday a clue would surface. The investigation continued in slow motion. Police followed every tip, but each led nowhere. Trucks were inspected, strangers questioned, transients tracked. Each lead ended the same. No evidence, no connection. Reynolds began to feel the weight of failure. In private, he told colleagues that the case lacked everything detectives rely on. No body, no scene, no witnesses, just absence. He said, "We have no solid evidence." The pressure was relentless. Residents wanted safety restored. Newspapers accused the police of incompetence. Radio shows replayed the same timeline over and over, fueling frustration. But there was nothing more to say. By the end of 1991, the investigation was effectively frozen. The files were thick with reports, but thin with answers. Officers still checked tips, but morale was low. For the community, the mystery hardened into belief. Helen was gone, taken by someone from outside, a faceless predator who had vanished just as quickly. What no one considered was the truth, that the person responsible was not a stranger, not a drifter, not a man in a truck. 8 months after Helen Whitmore vanished, a man walked into the station and changed everything. His name was Jason Miller, Emily's ex-boyfriend. He said that during an argument after they broke up, Emily lost her temper. She said she couldn't stand being controlled by her grandmother. Then she said the words he couldn't forget. She had killed her. He hadn't believed her at the time. Now he did. He wanted it on record. Detective Mark Reynolds reopened the file. He pulled every report from the night of October 14th. He reread Emily's original statement. He reviewed the single shoe found near the road, the empty stretch of street, the call Emily placed to police at noon the next day. He made a decision. Stop looking outward. Test the theory no one wanted. What if the threat came from inside the house? He started with money. With a subpoena, the team obtained Helen's bank and credit statements for the 3 months after she disappeared. Purchases jumped off the page. Designer clothing, new shoes, cosmetics, weekend motel charges along a highway 2 towns away. The dates landed days after Helen went missing. The merchant addresses were 20 to 40 miles from the town. The signatures on the receipts read H. Whitmore, but the handwriting didn't look right. Some slips didn't even list an ID. Reynolds sent the receipts to a handwriting examiner. He included Helen's known signatures from library records and the bank. The preliminary opinion was careful but firm. The recent signatures were not Helen's. Someone else had signed her name. Next came people who saw those purchases. 2 boutique employees remembered a young brunette with a local accent using a card that said Whitmore. She shopped alone. She seemed nervous but determined. A motel clerk said a young woman paid with a card in that same name. The descriptions matched Emily. Reynolds asked quietly about Emily's life after the disappearance. People told a similar story. She showed up with a new leather wallet, then a pair of shoes that didn't look cheap, then makeup brands no one in town usually bought. When asked, she called them gifts. No one knew from whom. With Jason's statement, the financial trail, the witness descriptions, and the shaky alibi, Reynolds requested a search warrant. A judge signed it. Officers searched Helen's home and Emily's room with care. They collected loose receipts, shopping bags, and packaging that matching SKU numbers on Helen's card history. In the hallway carpet, they found a patch that looked too clean. In the kitchen, a strong smell of bleach lingered, though it had been months. Under luminol, small flecks glowed in scattered spots. It wasn't enough for a full DNA profile, but it supported one idea. Someone had tried to clean. They turned to a car Emily had been using off and on. It wasn't hers, it belonged to a friend willing to cooperate. In the trunk, they found several tiny fibers jammed into the carpet seam. Under a microscope, the fibers looked like pieces of household carpet. Their color and weave were similar to the carpet in Helen's hallway. The match wasn't conclusive, but it was consistent. Under the chassis, caked soil contained the same type of gritty, pale sand common in the pine flats north of town. That area had been searched once in the fall, but heavy brush and weather had made it difficult. Reynolds brought Emily in for a follow-up interview. He didn't accuse her. He asked for details. What time exactly had she asked Helen for permission to go out? Who had she met first? When did she come home? Emily struggled. Times changed mid-sentence. First, she said she left early. Then she said she left after 10. She said she went to see a friend, then a different friend. When asked to list streets she took, she got them out of order. Reynolds planned a soft confrontation. He laid out the receipts from the boutiques in a careful row. He read back statements from the employees. He gave the handwriting opinion in plain words. He mentioned the motel clerk, the fibers, the soil, the missing hours. Emily denied using the card without permission. She said Helen let her buy a few things. She couldn't name a single time Helen had given her the card, nor any friend who saw that happen. She had no note, no message, no witness. The room felt smaller. Her answers grew shorter. At the station, the case classification shifted. Files that had been labeled unknown suspect moved to domestic suspect. An internal memo named Emily as the primary person of interest. Reynolds told his team what they needed next. One more piece of hard evidence. Ideally, the location of remains, or an object that tied the scene to Emily in a way no one could explain away. A small clue came from below the car. Soil from the undercarriage matched the sandy loam north of town. Search leaders proposed another sweep. In early spring, when brush thinned, a small team returned to those woods. They moved slowly, probing shallow depressions and old tarps dumped long ago. Near a stand of pines, they found disturbed ground that looked older than winter. Nearby lay a torn strip of nylon and several long hairs caught in a snag. The hairs were bagged. The ground was marked for a more careful excavation. The lab would need time, but the direction was clear. Back in town, whispers spread. Someone had told a cousin who told a friend that police were now focused on family. That news hit hard. People who had stood beside Emily at vigils felt confused, even betrayed. Some refused to believe it. Others admitted it explained too much. The town split. Half still blamed a stranger, half could no longer ignore the mounting facts. Reporters noticed the change in tone from the police. Press releases lost the language about unknown predators. They emphasized ongoing evaluation of all relationships. The sheriff's office asked the public for information about purchases made with Helen's card. They asked anyone who had seen Emily at stores or motels to come forward. Tips started to land that matched the receipts already in the file. Reynolds met once more with Jason Miller. He recorded a formal statement. Jason described the argument after the breakup, the words Emily used, the way she laughed nervously and then fell quiet. He said it had haunted him for months. He signed the transcript. The document became a keystone in the case. The emotional center of the investigation shifted too. For months, the town had rallied around a shared fear of an unknown offender. Now they faced a different terror. The possibility that the beloved granddaughter who had cried in the case had turned. The story no longer asked who did this. The new question was how the night unfolded. What was said in those minutes between the library and the final argument? What object struck what surface in that narrow window of time? How a house smelled of bleach months later. How a trunk gathered fibers from a carpet that should never have left the hallway. How a credit card carried a dead woman's name into stores and motels far from town. The truth was close enough to name, but still needed proof that could stand in court. That proof was coming. The woods would yield it, the lab would measure it, and the timeline would lock into place. When it did, the town would face the twist it never wanted. The missing librarian's last steps didn't lead to a stranger. They led home. And from that point on, the case would no longer be about rumors or shadows, but about motive, method, and the final acts of concealment on the night of October 14th. In the week before October 14th, tension at the Whitmore house kept rising. Emily argued with Helen about school, curfews, and money. She wanted freedom and spending money. Helen wanted structure and a plan. Emily had already slipped the card once or twice for small purchases. Helen noticed and warned her. The warnings grew sharper. The house felt tight, every conversation circling back to control and cash. The night itself began at the library. It was drizzling. The book club wrapped around 9 p.m. Helen said her goodbyes and started home on foot, as she always did. The walk took 10 minutes on a quiet route without streetlights. Inside the house, Emily was stewing. Earlier, she had called on the landline to say she wanted to go out. Helen had said, "Not tonight, we'll talk tomorrow." The answer felt like a door slamming. By the time Helen turned the key in the front door, Emily's anger had been simmering for hours. Between 9:25 and 9:35 p.m., a neighbor heard a thud, like something heavy hitting a hard surface. The sound came from the direction of the Whitmore house. Then there was silence. Inside, Helen went down in the kitchen hallway line. It was fast. It was final. Emily froze. She checked for breath and pulse with shaking hands. She knew what had happened without needing a doctor. Panic set in. The next minutes were about concealment. Emily closed the door and drew the curtains. She fetched towels. She pulled out a bottle of bleach from under the sink. She scrubbed the spots that looked wrong. She focused on the kitchen tile and the stretch of hallway carpet. She worked in circles until one patch of carpet looked oddly clean compared with the rest. She bagged the towels. She opened a back window to air out the smell, but then shut it again, afraid a neighbor might see. She stood in that chemical sting, listening for any sound outside. There was only the rain. She needed to move the body. In the small storage room off the back porch, she found an old nylon tarp. She dragged it inside and rolled Helen onto it as gently as panic allowed. The tarp was too short. She folded one end over and tied it with twine. She slid the bundle toward the back door, pausing every few feet to listen. The rain helped. It masked noise on the porch boards and washed away any faint marks on the steps. She needed a car. Emily did not have one that night. Helen's was in the shop. Emily called a friend she sometimes borrowed from. The call was short. She didn't give details. She asked to use the car again. The friend said where the keys were. Minutes later, a slow engine noise rolled down the block. A neighbor would later say a car crept by at about 9:30 p.m. That sound now fit a timeline. Emily hoisted the tarp into the trunk. She pushed until the lid latched. The edges caught carpet fibers that would later matter. She drove slowly through the sleeping town and turned north onto the county road, the one lined with pine and sandy soil. She had been out there before with friends. She knew pull-offs where no one stopped at night. She drove 20 to 40 miles. She pulled off where the ground was soft and pale. Under weak headlights and rain, she worked fast. She dragged the tarp to a shallow depression and scraped at the ground with a borrowed garden spade kept in the trunk. It wasn't deep. It was what a panicked person could do in minutes. She covered the tarp with sand and pine duff. A corner of nylon snagged and tore on a root. A few long strands of hair caught on a bush nearby. She did not notice. She got back in the car, breathing hard, and drove toward town. On the way back, she started to build a story. She needed the walk home to look like the danger point. She needed strangers to be the threat. She parked and retraced part of Helen's route. On a dark stretch between the library and the house, she tossed one of Helen's shoes into the weeds beside the road. She kept the purse for later. The next night, she placed it under a tree off a side street, where a searcher would likely spot it. Wallet and keys were left inside, nothing stolen, no robbery narrative to waste time on. The picture she wanted was cleaner. A random grab, a missing woman, no clear motive. By dawn, she began to reinforce her alibi. She called friends and said she had been out the previous evening. She was vague about times and places. She was specific about nothing. Then she waited. She did not call police at 8. She did not call them at 9. She called around noon, sounding worried, and said her grandmother never came home from the book club. The delay would later stand out. That morning she cleaned again. Bleak, her mistakes accumulated. She kept shopping bags and packaging. She left loose receipts in a drawer. She used the borrowed car enough for fibers from Helen's hallway carpet to embed along the trunk seam. Under the car, the sticky film of road sand matched the pale, gritty soil north of town. All of these were small things. Together they built a path. Her alibi cracked under simple checks. Landline logs didn't support her timeline. Friends could not confirm exact hours. When questioned again, she changed the order of where she went and with whom. Dates shifted. Times blurred. It did not look like the memory of a normal night. It looked like the story of a person working around gaps. Even then, she kept steering the narrative. She talked about a strange car she'd seen near the library. She mentioned a man in a hat. She played to the fear that had settled over the town. Police followed the tips and burned time. For months, the focus stayed on the outsider. That was the power of her performance. She stood at the center of the search and pointed away from herself. 8 months later, the center collapsed. Jason Miller came forward with her outburst after their breakup. "I killed her," he remembered. He gave a sworn statement. Detectives lined up his account next to the card charges, the boutique clerks, the motel record, and the carpet fibers. The pieces locked. The motive was not just anger. It was comfort and status and cash. The act had been impulsive. The days that followed were deliberate. Forensics tightened the frame. Luminol reacted faintly in the hall and kitchen. Long hairs recovered in the woods were sent to the lab. Soil from the car's undercarriage matched the sandy loam of the northern pines. Fibers from the trunk matched the color and weave of Helen's hallway carpet. Each item on its own might be explained. Together they formed a chain that pulled back to the night of October 14th. The portrait of the offender cleared. Emily had not planned a murder. That link was on the way. Search teams returned to the Pine Flats with new coordinates, guided by soil samples from the car. They found disturbed ground that predated winter. A torn strip of nylon, weathered but persistent. Hair caught in scrub at shoulder height. The location was marked and secured. The lab work would follow. What happened that night was no longer a riddle. It was a sequence. An argument about money and control. A sudden blow and a fall. A frantic cleanup. A tarp, a trunk, and a drive north. A shallow concealment in pale sand. A staged scene on a dark road. A delayed call to police. A public performance. A private spending spree. And then slowly the small mistakes that accumulate when a story is false. The ending of this part is not an arrest yet. It's the moment the investigation stops asking whether Emily could have done it, and starts asking only how to present the truth cleanly in court. The question shifts from who to how, step by step, minute by minute, object by object. The case points to a single path. From a library at 9, to a house at 10 past, to a silence at half past, and to a car rolling away in the rain. From there, Part 8 begins. The build-out of charges, the warrant, the shock to a divided town, and the trial that would put an end to the mystery Helen's friends carried for nearly 2 years. The break came in early 1992, months after the search teams had gone quiet. A second sweep of the northern pines turned up disturbed ground that matched winter maps. Under the top layer, investigators found bones, a torn strip of weathered nylon, and a small metal clip that looked like it came off a hair accessory. The site was marked and sealed. The lab moved fast. Dental records matched. Microscopic work on hair and enamel lined up with Helen Whitmore. With that confirmation, a judge signed the warrant. Officers drove to the Whitmore house and took Emily Carter into custody for murder in the first degree. At the station, they read her rights. She said her grandmother had left, that she didn't know where she went. When asked about the credit card receipts, she hesitated and said she'd borrowed the card with permission. When asked who saw that permission, she had no name. Her public defender arrived and advised her not to answer more. The interview stopped. The paperwork started. Prosecutors filed the primary count of murder in the first degree. They added abuse of a corpse based on the concealment in the forest. They added financial fraud counts for unauthorized withdrawals and charges in the weeks after Helen's disappearance. The grand jury heard the summary of the case, the timeline from the library, the argument witnesses, the luminol in the kitchen and hall, the soil and carpet fibers, the boutique and motel employees, the handwriting analysis, and the new recovery from the woods. They returned a true bill. The case moved forward. Before trial, the defense attacked the edges. They filed to suppress the luminol findings, arguing contamination and limited probative value. They challenged the handwriting analysis as subjective. They probed the path of the search warrant that led to the second sweep of the forest. The judge heard testimony from technicians and scene supervisors. Chain of custody records were clean. The luminol wasn't the only signal. It was part of a cluster that included the carpet clean spot and inconsistent cleaning patterns. The court denied most suppression requests. The case stayed intact. Prosecutors offered a plea to second degree with a long but finite term. If Emily would admit responsibility, the state would set aside the fraud and abuse enhancements. She refused. The community would hear the whole story. The trial date was set for 1993. The courtroom filled on day one. Reporters from Portland and Salem took the front benches. Two ideas still split the town: the stranger who prowled the unlit streets, and the granddaughter who stood at the vigils and cried into cameras. The papers had a name for it now: the betrayal within. The judge reminded the jury to decide on facts, not headlines. A clerk checked the evidence cart: photos, maps, charts, receipts in plastic sleeves. The state opened with a straight line. Helen leaves the library at 9. She walks home. At 9:30, a neighbor hears a heavy impact from the direction of her house. No church the next morning. Noon call to police. A shoe on the road. A purse placed under a tree. A kitchen scrubbed hard enough to lighten a carpet patch. A borrowed car with carpet fibers in the trunk and sandy loam under the frame. A shallow grave in the pines. A credit card used for clothes and cosmetics signed H. Whitmore by a young woman no one mistook for Helen. And a confession to a boyfriend in a fight. A handwriting expert explained bass lines and loops, the way a writer repeats unique habits without thinking. Helen's bank signature card and library forms drew clean, consistent H's and neat crossstrokes. The receipts showed a taller H and a different pressure pattern. In the expert's opinion, the signatures on the new receipts were not made by Helen Whitmore. The defense labeled the field subjective. The expert agreed that all comparisons include judgment, but repeated the points of difference and the reasons they mattered. The crime lab technician took the stand next. Photos of the kitchen and hall went up. A normal hallway carpet will show even traffic wear, she said. Here, one segment was lighter and more uniform, as if scrubbed. Luminol revealed faint reactions in specks and small streaks, typical of a wipe-down where protein had been present. Not bright waves, not dramatic splashes, but enough to mark a path. On cross, the defense asked whether household cleaners can produce false positives. Yes, some can. That is why we do not rely on luminol alone. We look at the pattern and the context. The pattern lined up with the argument and the thud the neighbor reported. Vehicle evidence came in through another analyst. They vacuumed the trunk of the car Emily had borrowed. Under magnification, they found fibers that matched the color and weave of Helen's hallway carpet. Not rare fibers, but a consistent match with the rug inside the Whitmore home. Under the frame, the lab scraped a film of pale, gritty soil with quartz and feldspar in a mix typical of the northern pine flats. The analyst compared it to soil samples collected from the burial site. The mineral content and grain distribution matched. Soil can travel on any car, the defense said. True, the analyst replied, but it matched the exact area where the remains were found, and it arrived within the window when Emily drove that car. The forensic anthropologist walked the jury through. The financial investigator drew a simple chart. Dates down the left, locations across the top, amounts in the cells. Cash withdrawals made at times when Emily said she was out with friends. Store purchases at boutiques where clerks remembered a young woman, not an older librarian. A motel charge. None of these matched Helen's habits. Each of them happened after Helen was already missing. A phone company custodian explained landline logs. The calls from Emily's supposed friends did not match her timeline. 2 of those friends testified and could not fix her at a place and time that would remove her from the house during the critical window. Under cross, the defense stressed that none of these witnesses saw a killing. The custodian agreed. He saw numbers and minutes. They did not support the alibi. Detective Mark Reynolds took the stand. He told the jury how the case started with a fear of strangers and a blue truck that no one could find. He talked about the limits of the early 90s, no home cameras, few streetlights, little surveillance in small towns. He described the shift 8 months later when the confession surfaced, and how the financial trail and the boutique employees and the motel slip all pointed inward, not outward. He said the team kept looking for an outsider until the list was exhausted. No ransom calls, no similar assaults in neighboring towns, no suspect who matched every detail. When they turned back to the house, the pieces began to fit. The defense case took aim at the gaps. No eyewitness to a strike. No photo of Emily in the forest. Environmental damage to the remains made cause of death unclear. Luminol can mislead. Soil moves. Fibers travel. Jason had a reason to be bitter after a breakup. The lawyer floated an alternative. An accidental fall during an argument and a panicked cover-up. Or a different person who used Helen's card and knew her habits. The defense asked the jury to hold on to doubt. On rebuttal, the state put the pieces back together. Accidents do not lead to a staged scene, a delayed call to police, a body in a shallow grave, and weeks of spending on a dead woman's account. Accidents do not leave a single shoe on a dark road on one night and a purse under a tree the next. Arguments about fibers and soil meant little once mapped to the route north and the known timeline. The state asked the jury to look at the entire chain and the way every link reinforced the next. Closing arguments were short. The prosecutor said the case was about what people do after a line is crossed. Emily did not call an ambulance. She did not run to a neighbor. She cleaned. She moved. She spent. She lied. Then she stood before candles and talked about a stranger who never existed. The defense said the state told a compelling story, but stories are not proof. The law demands certainty beyond a reasonable doubt, and no one had seen a killing. The jury went out for 2 days. They asked to see the timeline map and the gallery of receipts again. They asked for the hallway photo that showed the lighter carpet patch. They reread the anthropologist's summary and the detective's notes about the purse and the shoe. When they filed back, the foreperson stood and spoke clearly. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Guilty of abuse of a corpse. Guilty of financial fraud tied to the unauthorized use of... The town reacted in waves. Some people had believed the stranger theory until the last minute and felt betrayed twice. First by the crime, then by the lie that fed their fear. Others said the evidence had been clear for months, and they were relieved to see order restored. The newspaper ran a sober headline. The radio talk shows, less so. By the end of the week, the Roads Committee had a proposal for new lights along the library route. The church and the library announced a joint fund for reading programs in Helen's name. The defense appealed. They argued that the search that led to the second forest sweep was too broad, that luminol should not have come in, and that the handwriting expert was given too much weight. The appellate court affirmed. Even without luminol, the panel wrote, the receipts, the retail identifications, the vehicle fibers, the soil, the phone logs, the timeline, and the recovery from the Pines provided overwhelming independent support. The conviction stood. By the time the file went back to the trial court, the town had settled into new habits. Parents changed evening routines. The library set a stricter closing time for winter. Volunteers built a small corner at the back with a photo of Helen, a bronze plaque, and a shelf of children's books that needed new bindings. On the wall, a simple line read, "In memory of a life spent teaching others to read." The story of a stranger on a dark road no longer carried weight in the coffee shop or after Sunday service. People talked instead about how certainty can blind a search, how a kind face on a poster can hide a different truth, and how evidence must be followed, even when it points inside the walls of a home. The case had changed how neighbors looked at fear, and how investigators framed their first theories. The legal chapter closed with a docket entry. The human chapter did not. That is how Part 8 ends, with a verdict, a sentence, an appeal affirmed. The library moved first. Staff placed a framed photo of Helen near the children's shelves. A small plaque under it read, "In memory of Helen Whitmore." The shelves she had fixed now held new copies of the books she used most. A sign-up sheet went beside them for Wednesday night reading. Volunteers filled every slot within days. The routine felt simple. It also felt firm. Keep the lights on. Keep the room warm. Keep the pages turning. The church and the library built a rhythm. Each October they held a joint reading and prayer service. The pastor kept it measured. He asked for grace without excusing harm. He reminded people to call for help when they heard trouble. He said faith was not silence. He said care meant action. After the service, the library stayed open an extra hour. Children checked out books. Older neighbors traded phone numbers. The night ended early. People walked home in pairs. A small fund began with a glass jar on the checkout counter. It carried Helen's name. Coins filled it first.
Then checks arrived from businesses, a lumber mill and a cafe. The fund paid to repair worn books. It launched a basic literacy class on weeknights. It added 3 small scholarships for students who could not afford bus passes or fees. The library posted the numbers each year: donations in, expenses out, names masked, totals clear. Transparency kept the pace steady. People gave because they could see what their money did. Street safety changed 1 block at a time. The path between the library and the residential streets got better lighting. 2 cool boxes went in at the darkest turns. City workers trimmed hedges and cleared a strip by the roadside. The library shortened winter hours and started a "walk together" board by the door. Anyone leaving after dusk wrote a name and headed out in groups. The sign stayed tidy. It sent a message: we look out for each other on purpose. Police training also changed.
Sarah Johnson became the voice the town trusted. She kept her accounts plain. She described what she had seen, what she had heard, and what she had done. She said she called when something felt wrong. She said neighbors should call too. At community nights, she walked people through the morning she noticed Helen missing. She underlined the steps anyone can take: knock on the door, phone a friend, notify police early. Her talks were short. They were repeated until they stuck. Detective Mark Reynolds wrote a short presentation for the State Academy. He broke the investigation into blocks with dates on each one. He showed how a few small items, soil on a car, fibers in a trunk, ink on a receipt, become strong when you connect them in order. He showed the first timeline with wrong assumptions. He showed the second timeline with new facts. He told recruits to be humble with first theories. He said the work is not to be right fast. It is to be right in the end. Local media took stock too. A station aired a half-hour special called Stranger Versus. Family reporters placed a side-by-side of early headlines about a mystery truck and late reports on financial records. Editors wrote an internal guide for missing person coverage. Verify details before bolting them into a narrative. Avoid loaded phrases unless there is proof. State the gaps clearly. Keep the focus on evidence and calls for information, not speculation. High school teachers used the case to teach process. A forensic analyst visited once a year and talked about chain of evidence. She showed how a receipt moves from a cash drawer to a bag, then to a lab, then into a courtroom binder. Another class practiced practical safety. Students planned routes home with more light. They learned how to place a 911 call and what to say. The lessons were concrete. They gave teenagers usable steps. On the legal track, filings continued for a while. Emily's lawyers appealed on procedure. They questioned the search warrants and the use of luminol photos. The appellate court reviewed the record. It found that the warrants had lawful grounds. It noted that the state had multiple independent supports: financial records, witness IDs, soil match patterns, fiber correspondences, and a consistent timeline. The court upheld the conviction. The life sentence stood. The town noted the result and moved on. The new head librarian built content. The church and library wrote a small guide for memorial events. It set boundaries for the press. It asked that cameras stay off during prayers. It laid out a respectful path for interviews. Volunteers were trained to protect the private grief of relatives and keep the focus on public good. The guide cut down on conflict. It made the events predictable, calm, and useful. The story entered podcasts and documentaries. Producers asked for drama. Locals pushed back. They insisted on accuracy. The programs kept the chain of evidence at the center. They explained why mixed signals in early days are common. They followed the path from a rumor to a lead, and then to a dead end or a fact. Listeners heard a disciplined arc, not a sensational one. Public records listed Emily's status in simple terms: appeals filed, appeals denied, sentence unchanged. The town did not spend time on her prison routine. That was not the point. The point was the change at home, the lights on the path, the classes at the library, and the habit of verifying before spreading a story. A clear message grew out of everything. Community trust is not automatic. It rests on evidence and openness. It grows when people admit mistakes and correct course. It lasts when practice is boring and steady, not showy. The town decided to live that way. They said it out loud, and then they did it. Markers helped people remember the sequence of change. In 1993, a judge announced the sentence. In 1994, the fund and the memorial space took their first form. In 1996, new lights and 2 calm boxes went live. In 2001, the local university added a case study to its criminology course. In 2011, the 20th year brought a larger vigil and a fresh set of safety leaflets. In 2021, the 30th year drew former residents back. The pastor kept the service short. The library moved smoothly through the reading list. The walk home was calm and well lit. Sarah still speaks at those gatherings. She does not circle around what happened. She says the town failed to ask hard questions soon enough. Then she lists what they do now. The list is practical. She ends with a reminder to call early when something feels off. She never raises her voice. She does not need to. People listen closely. Detective Reynolds is older now. He sits in the back for the October event. He wrote one more memo before retiring. It boiled down to 3 steps. Question the first story. Build a timeline that matches records, not hopes. Follow the money when a missing person relies on a caregiver. The memo is pinned to the training wall. New detectives have it in their binders. Students who once listened to Helen read now bring their own children on Wednesdays. They like the simple parts. Names on a clipboard, a clock on the wall, a chair by the lamp. The librarian starts on time. She keeps the pace even. She closes the night with a reminder to walk each other to the boulevard. Parents nod and finish their checkouts. Kids tug on sleeves and point to next week's book. Local reporters have changed their habits. When a person goes missing, they publish a clear list. Not every lesson is comfortable. Some neighbors feel awkward asking questions about family life. They ask anyway. They do it with care. They bring food. They offer rides. They keep numbers on the fridge. They remind each other that help is not judgment. Help is help. If a night gets loud and tense, someone phones it in. Officers arrive. The call goes on the log. Patterns get noticed earlier. The town learned to separate privacy from secrecy. Privacy respects the room you need to live. Secrecy hides harm. The first is a right. The second is a red flag. The difference sounds abstract until it is not. The church group practices the language. I respect your privacy. I will not keep a secret if someone is in danger. Clear words prevent confusion when stress rises. Each October, the program runs in the same order. A reading for children, A short talk on safety. A statement from the library about the year's projects. A moment of silence. Then people take the path home. The rhythm is stable. It has the same drumbeat year after year. That is the point. Stability is the response to chaos. Structure is the promise to stay awake. The story no longer belongs to rumor or to fear. It belongs to steps that hold up under scrutiny. A plaque that names the loss. A fund that pays for books and classes. Lights that do not flicker. A police checklist that pushes past bias. A church that calls for action as well as prayer. A librarian with a roster and a lockbox. A neighbor ready to dial when a voice in the dark says, "This feels wrong." Some visitors ask if telling the story again risks reopening wounds. The town answers with quiet resolve. We tell it to keep the right things alive. We tell it because facts teach better than myths. We tell it to remind ourselves what works. We tell it so new people know why the